and morbidity. Like as we spoke about systemic hypertension, ischemic heart disease, and more so with the high fat diet and our stress factor and sedentary lifestyle. So ischemic heart disease has become one of the major factors for death, which can be they can present as lot of if you come to our ward, if you see most of the patients, like maybe your 30% of patients will be having heart failure, and maybe 20% will be presenting with stroke, and some 10% of patients will be presenting typically of complications of ischemic heart disease in the form of angina, myocardial infarction, post myocardial angina, post myocardial heart failure, and sudden cardiac death. So the whole spectrum of disease comes under ischemic heart disease. So the main part, like the pathogenesis behind it, is as rightly said, is because of decreased blood supply to the heart. So when we go to the blood supply to the heart, or the oxygen reaching the heart, which are the arteries supplying the heart? What are the arteries called?
Coronary.
Yeah, so coronary arteries. Now these coronary arteries, now the basic anatomy you will know, no, that it is a main branch, and then it divides into right and left, and the left divides into left anterior descending and left circumflex artery and right coronary artery. Now the main if LAD, that is left anterior descending, is involved, we see a major effects when there is an infarction. That is, when there is a complete block of left anterior descending artery, patient may present in a very bad shape. But that does not mean that other vessels, if there is a damage, we see the spectrum of manifestation, and that is the manifest form in the sense that you see the patient who comes with some complaint. Now there are many patients who has a silent episodes of ischemia, and which may not be noticeable. They are just felt as a discomfort, and even if they had gone to a doctor and ECG taken, ECG may be normal by the time the patient reaches the hospital. Okay, now these minor ischemia can, in over a period of time, either present as chronic stable angina, or they may present as myocardial infarction, that is the or the heart attack, or they may, unfortunately, one group which presents in the form of chronic ischemic heart disease in the form of heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. So these are the many effects of ischemic heart disease. Now, when there is an ischemic heart disease, as we said, it can be one due to the blockage of the coronary vessels. Why does this blockage occur?
Atherosclerosis.
Yes. So atherosclerosis is the main component. What else can cause this blockage? Rare causes.
Embolism.
Very good. Embolism.
Vasospasm.
Then what else can cause?
Vasospasm.
Vasospasm. Excellent. Then what else? When there is osteal stenosis and all, no? Or rarely, when anatomically, where does the coronary vessels arise from?
Aortic sinus.
Yes. Now, suppose it, because of congenital defect may come from the right atrium and all, no? So all these congenital defects, these are rare causes, where even in pediatric age group we can see myocardial infarctions. Now this is one component where there is a blockade and reduced blood flow which may cause infarction. Now what are the other components? When the oxygen itself is reduced, the oxygen in the blood itself is decreased when it comes to the heart. So what are the conditions? What if hemoglobin is low? Anemia, right? Now a patient with anemia, severe anemia or moderate anemia, does a heavy exercise with a mild atherosclerotic change, is another in a danger zone only. Here, the oxygen itself reaching to the heart is very less. You understand my point?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Then next is the coronary vessels are okay. No, it's still not gone to so much block. But if there is left ventricular hypertrophy, now this left ventricular hypertrophy, last class itself I told you that systemic hypertension, no, it can cause the left ventricular hypertrophy. Now, now the heart is in, always in the pumping mode. In which phase does the blood? The blood supply is when the oxygen reaches the heart muscles, in which phase? Is it a systolic phase or the diastolic phase?
Diastole.
Yeah, diastolic phase. So when suppose the patient has palpitation or increase in the heart rate, which phase gets compromised?
Diastole.
Diastole. So here, so this other factor we have to keep in mind. Now, suppose if there is a tachycardia, that is exercise-induced tachycardia or whatever, your sympathetic stimulation which causes the tachycardia, so that itself is going to reduce the the oxygen to reach the muscles, heart muscles. On top of that, if there is an atherosclerosis, it becomes a dangerous combination. Then other conditions like smoking. Now, how does smoking going to aggravate your ischemic heart disease apart from atherosclerosis?
Inducing vasoconstriction, ma'am.
Yeah, one can be can induce vasoconstriction. Second, what they say is, now carboxyhemoglobin level rises when the person is smoking. Now, this is in turn going to reduce further oxygen reaching the heart. Now, smoking per se becomes a very important risk factor for ischemic heart disease, apart from atherosclerosis, vasospasm, and other things. Now, next is third is when you are exposed to extreme cold, okay, or extreme stress. Okay, so all this, a factor which in combination is going to land up the patient with either a full-blown myocardial infarction or an unstable angina or a chronic stable angina or any spectrum you are going to get. Then suppose a patient is having a cardiomyopathy, HOCM, that is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Now, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is like an LVH. Now, LVH with a mild atherosclerosis, with the smoker, with the obesity. Now, all this becomes a deadly combination for ischemic heart disease. So, they say that it's becoming so common that in a year or so, the ischemic heart disease is going to become the commonest cause of mortality worldwide. That is why we nowadays concentrate more on non-communicable disease and prevention, the primordial prevention, all that. Why so much stress is given is because these have become the most important cause of death worldwide. So now we'll go to the definition of ischemic heart disease. So represents a group of pathophysiologically related syndromes resulting from myocardial ischemia. Now, it is because of an imbalance between myocardial perfusion and cardiac demand for oxygenated blood. Now, a person who is having a fixed stenosis because of atherosclerosis will be comfortable when the patient is at rest. But once a person starts doing the activity, that is going to the market or walking, that is the time the demand is going to rise. Whereas the perfusion here is going to be limited. So in such a state also, we are going to get ischemia. So ischemia is a very dynamic concept which you should understand. Now this ischemia is going to limit the tissue oxygenation. Now therefore the ATP generation and also the availability of nutrients and removal of metabolic waste. Now suppose the ATP generation, oxygenation is reduced, ATP generation is reduced, your glucose is not going to get utilized. The main utilization, the energy which is going to be utilized in heart is fatty acids and glucose. Now once your aerobic pathway is blocked, the anaerobic will kick in. Now because of anaerobic pathway is kicking in, the lactic acidosis will occur. Now this is going to cause a lot of damage to the heart, which in a period of time is going to land up the patient with all full-blown picture of an ischemic heart disease. Now, more than 90% of myocardial ischemia results from reduced blood flow due to obstructive atherosclerotic lesion in the epicardial coronary artery. That, as we already spoke, now coronary artery is epicardial, and once the ischemia sets in, when you see the heart, when you do a cross cut section and see epicardial to endocardial, the blood is going to flow. Now, when there is an ischemia, the first in the wall, left ventricular wall, the first part to be damaged will become the endocardium. And suppose if there is if the obstruction gets relieved, at least only the damage will be limited only to endocardium. But if the obstruction is complete, drastic, it may also lead on to transmural infarct, and that is when the myocardial infarction sets in. So we should understand that this ischemic heart disease is synonymous with your coronary artery disease. Now, when we come to the causes of ischemic heart disease, so as see, 90% is your atherosclerosis. Now, something about atherosclerosis, as we already know, here also there is something called the genetic and your environmental factor. Now, genetically, you may be more prone to develop atherosclerosis. That is always there. And they say that even from childhood and adolescent, I think you have read in pathology, if we take a cross section and see the fatty deposition starts from that age group. That is why we start telling you should maintain the ideal body weight and take a lifestyle modification. It's not primordial. Before any onset, we have to start because of this component of 90%. But we should not forget this 10% of causes which can be treated, or at least, of course, this part we have to do. This 10% also you should keep in mind, which can further reduce the onset of ischemic heart disease. One, as we already spoke, is coronary emboli. Then your myocardial vessel inflammation, vasculitis, vascular spasm. So what happens is, this is a dangerous combo. There is an atherosclerosis which is only 50%. Now, when the spasm suddenly occurs when exposure to cold or sudden exercise, unaccustomed exercise. So this spasm can be the factor which will lead to mortality. So conditions where otherwise modest vascular occlusion may become a consequential. That means what should have otherwise been a very mild event may land up with the death of a patient. So this myocardial hypertrophy, that is why we say a patient who has a left ventricular hypertrophy, that becomes an independent marker for increased mortality. So that much importance we give when we see an ECG where there is left ventricular hypertrophy. Now, hypoxemia. Suppose a cardiac patient or a heart failure patient is anemic. Now, this hypoxemia is going to worsen or precipitate disease. That is why any patient, diabetic, hypertensive, ischemic heart disease, failure patient who is anemia has to be treated very seriously. Otherwise, that is going to be additional factor. Even in a rheumatic heart disease patient may present with congestive cardiac failure. Now, if the congestive cardiac failure patient is having anemia has to be given importance. If you treat the anemia, 50% of our problem can get solved. Then, of course, systemic hypotension, that is shock due to any cause. So we should not let the patient BP to fall below. No, as we talk of hypertension, even hypotension is equally dangerous. So now, so we'll go to the pathogenesis. So when we see the coronary vessel, so the first part is that epicardial arteries. Then it becomes a smaller vessels, then arterioles, and then the capillaries. In the capillaries is the actual exchange occurs. In this arteriole, that is microcirculation, that is less than 100 micrometer, that is where your all the exchange of metabolites is going to take place. Now this small arteries, less than 400 micrometer, this is where the pressure is auto-regulated. Now, suppose if there is any vasospasm or any changes where there is going to be vasoconstriction, so this is the place where the vasoconstriction is going to occur. And this epicardial vessel, more than 400 micrometer, is mainly responsible for the transport of the blood, which is going to receive to the tissue. Now, what is the importance? Now, in a microcirculation, if there is any changes, which may not be visible in ECG, but patient may ECG, that is what we are going to see, any patient who comes with a chest pain, we are going to have an ECG done. So ECG may be normal, but they will have microcirculation changes that itself may cause ischemia. So there are so many things, so many dynamic activities which goes inside the heart muscles. So suppose, as we said, atherosclerosis of the epicardial coronary artery is the major issue. So what does it do? It causes a progressive narrowing of lumen. Now, up to 50% of narrowing, there's not going to be any change. I mean, the person may lead a normal life with a normal activity. But once the occlusion starts going below 50%, I mean, above 50%, that is 60 to 70%, in around 60%, what happens is the person will be able to do normal activity. But once they go for more than normal activity, they may start developing some chest pain or fatigability, easy fatigability that happens. By the time they develop more than 70% occlusion, you get a significant coronary artery disease, which can be precipitated by exercise. And if it is 90% occlusion, even at rest, we can have all the symptoms. So what happens is, once the stenosis occurs, that atherosclerosis occurs, two things can happen. It may become a fixed obstruction, or it may be an acute plaque. Now, what is the importance of this? Now, suppose if there is a fixed obstruction in a left anterior descending vessel, which is going to supply your full left ventricle, which forms the major activity. Now, suppose if the patient is having a fixed obstruction, typically the patients will have chronic stable angina in the form that patient will be comfortable at rest. That is how the complaint they're going to give. They're going to get a typical anginal chest pain when they walk or do some sort of exercise, which is like 2 flights of stairs, or maybe going up to the next street, or going up to the market, or doing some of their employment activity. Then they take rest and the pain subsides, your typical anginal thing. Now, this is one group. Then other group is acute plaque erosion or rupture, where the thrombosis, that is the atherosclerosic plaque, may be less than 50%. But it is a very unstable plaque. So what happens is, it may rupture suddenly, which may cause compromised blood flow and may cause even sudden myocardial infarction and death. They may have been apparently normal before this event. So we have a thing called a stable, we have a thing called unstable plaque, and then next is a stable plaque. Now, this unstable plaque are the dangerous group of people who may present apparently normal sudden myocardial infarction and death. Now, this stable atherosclerotic plaque, even they may become unpredictable. So what happens? There may be small erosions, ulceration, fissuring, deep hemorrhage. So they go for partially life-threatening atherothrombotic plaque. So they may present with increasing angina. What was previously, they said that only on 2 flights of stairs or going only to 2 streets, what we are getting. Now we are getting even at, just I go from this room to that room, I start developing. Now it is becoming a life-threatening. Now, on top of that, if there is a superimposed thrombus, there will be sudden occlusion and they may suddenly land up with myocardial infarction. So now here, so this is the whole spectrum what you are going to see. So you can have a no plaque disruption, which is a stable angina, plaque disruption, which causes the blockage of vessel, which is not complete block. That is, it is an incomplete block. So either they go for a complete event, or they may, they may even come out. So here thrombosis along with vasoconstriction. So once the vasoconstriction is cleared, your blood circulation is going to re-establish. Or emboli, if emboli clears, is going to re-establish, and they will still be only in unstable angina. Or acute plaque changes with the abrupt thrombosis, occlusion, myocardial necrosis, and your typical myocardial infarction occurs. Now these three we clearly know. Now the fourth is you are having a regional myocardial ischemia. I told that epicardial blood vessels are going to supply to the muscle, which will supply, but the endocardium is always compromised when there is a myocardial ischemia. Now that part may start going for remodeling. And second thing is, when there is increase of ischemia, there may be electrical changes. So patient may have a silent ischemic changes, may suddenly present in ventricular arrhythmia like ventricular tachycardia or ventricular fibrillation, and they may be brought to the hospital as a sudden cardiac death. Now this is a whole spectrum of manifestation which an ischemic heart disease patient can occur. So now when we go for so when we are going for all these factors, so what I told, now I'm putting this graph, gives you a nutshell what happens. Now there is a mismatch of myocardial supply and demand has started. Now what happens as the time progresses? So initial period, that is near term, that repetitive and prolonged ischemia. So as the first, what happens is, it is only endothelial and microvascular dysfunction. But still the insult continues. So the subendocardial portion is going to start getting damaged. So you get a decreased subendocardial perfusion. still the damage is continuing. You're having a continuous, on and off ischemia is going on. So you have an altered metabolism, and this is the time when your ECG may start showing changes like abnormal HT segments or T wave changes. Then, as further, the ischemic heart disease, the pathology is undergoing faster. They may start developing focal myocardial fibrosis and micro infarctions. So that part is going to get damaged. So heart muscles don't, regenerate. So what is damaged is damaged. So it starts showing in form of diastolic dysfunction. So from the stage that is altered metabolism and the STT segment, you are going to see the changes in the ECG and this diastolic dysfunction by echocardiogram. By then the patient may present with features of heart failure. Then decreased segmental perfusion. The whole segment may be gone. So what happens is later on, still the mismatch is very severe. They may go in for regional wall motion abnormality. That is, the particular portion of a left ventricular wall or a right ventricular wall is going to be not moving in sync with the other part. So you in echo will see it as regional wall motion abnormality. And finally, the systolic dysfunction, where the patient will be with heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. So what is the normal ejection fraction?
Around 70%, yeah?
Yes, so above 60 is normal. So when there is a systolic dysfunction, so we term heart failure, we are going to have subsequent classes on heart failure. So the latest terminology is heart failure with preserved ejection fraction and reduced ejection fraction. So when there is a systolic dysfunction and a reduced ejection fraction, it is going to be a very bad scenario with a full-blown heart failure. And further, what happens is, when there is a reduced below 45%, when the ejection fraction goes to 30 to 45%, spontaneous electrical activity, they may land up with the ventricular fibrillation, ventricular tachycardia, dysarrhythmias, and sudden cardiac death becomes very common. So this is your what is the timeline of event, what happens. So now we'll go to the most important, this angina pectoris. So this is one thing I think you'll all be asked in clinics, and you should know in and out. So what is angina pectoris? It's a paroxysmal and recurrent attacks of substernal and precordial chest discomfort caused by transient, that is 15 seconds to 15 minutes, myocardial ischemia that is insufficient to induce myocyte necrosis. If myocyte necrosis occurs, what do we call it?
Infarction.
Infarction. So it is a stage, so angina. Now, so whenever we, now in clinics, when what we say, it is a chest pain, left-sided chest pain, squeezing type of pain, choking type, or the patients, they say like elephant sitting on my chest, that is choking type of pain. So that is what they'll say, which radiates. Where all does it radiate, angina pain?
Right arm, neck.
Right arm, left arm, mama?
I heard one ma'am say that it's more commonly in the right arm than
no, ma. Left da. Okay. So, yeah. Not in the right. Left arm, okay, fine. In the ulnar border mostly. Okay, then?
Jaw, ma'am.
Left jaw. It can also go to the back also. Okay, so that is our typical description. So so it is because of, they say, ischemia induced release of adenosine, bradykinin, and other molecules that stimulate vagal and afferent nerve. So here is a picture, angina, a type of temporary chest pain. Now, what is that sign called? He is holding the fist like that. Is there any name for that sign?
Levin sign.
Yes, excellent. Levine. Okay, they hold it in the fist, and if you ask the person, the patient to show the pain, they show like that. That is a sign. Okay. So whatever, when the raised myocardial demand and decreased myocardial perfusion, you can have three terms. One is stable angina, one is Prince-Metal variant angina, and one is unstable angina. Now, what is stable angina?
Chest pain that sets in only with exertion, ma'am, but it's relieved by rest in night.
So there is a fixed, like whatever, no, they say 2 flights of stairs or to going to 2 street or whatever work. Till I do this work, I'm not having pain. Then I get a pain. You have a very defined character. Okay, what is this unstable angina?
It only gets progressively worse and is present even at rest.
Okay, progressively worse, present even as rest. The first event itself is a severe anginal chest pain. No? All these things are going to make us think in terms of unstable angina. Now, what is this Prince-Metal variant angina?
Vasospastic.
Vasospastic type, vasospasm, which is present in the rest, in the night when the patient is asleep and all, no, gets up. So it is a variant angina. Here it is a vasospasm is the main thing. So what drug will we prefer if it is a Prince-Metal angina?
Calcium blocker.
Calcium channel blocker like diltiazem. Okay, so this you should know. But whatever it is, all these three, there is an increase in myocardial demand and a decrease myocardial perfusion. So this is going to this is the pathophysiology, and we can have various forms of anginal presentation. So stable angina is your typical angina pectoris. It's a most common form. So it is caused by an imbalance in coronary perfusion that is due to chronic stenosis coronary atherosclerosis relative to myocardial demand, such as that produced by physical activity, emotional excitement, or any other cause of increased cardiac load. So the typical, so this is how you know, this is a very common theory question also for you. So you should know what to write. So usually relieved by rest, which decreases the demand, or we give ISDN and all, known patient for nitroglycerin, which is a strong vasodilator, which increases the perfusion. Now this Prince-Metal variant angina is an uncommon form of episodic myocardial ischemia caused by coronary artery spasm. Now, this person may have a significant coronary atherosclerosis, but this anginal attack is unrelated to physical activity, heart rate, or blood pressure. Now, what are the precipitating factor for this Prince-Metal is alcohol, iced drink, then this cocaine, nicotine, if you have done pacing, and hyperventilation. So, all these are the factors they say which precipitates Prince-Metal variant angina. Now, this responds to vasodilator, and this is a group of patients which responds very well to your calcium channel blocker. Now, unstable angina is a crescendo angina. That is pattern of increasingly frequent pain, often of prolonged duration, that is precipitated by progressively lower levels of physical activity, and that even occurs at rest. Now, this is because there is a disruption of atherosclerotic plaque with superimposed partial thrombosis and possibly embolization or vasospasm or both. Now, why do we call it as imminent MI? That is pre-infarction MI angina is a patient who comes with this, we have to find out whether it is full blown, that is it is completely blocked or it is only partially blocked. Why? Suppose if it is full blown myocardial infarction, what is the treatment of choice? What do we give to break the clots?
Fibrinolysis.
Thrombolytics can be given. Whereas if it is unstable angina, we don't want the further thrombus to form a complete block. So if it is unstable angina, we have proved that it is not MI, we are going to start with heparin. So even our treatment decision making is going to depend whether it is unstable angina or a full-blown acute coronary. Of course, acute coronary syndrome only it comes, whether it requires thrombolysis or not. So now actually this is going to be discussed also in next class. So just a brief in this class. So myocardial infarction, of course, it is a heart attack due to necrosis of heart muscle resulting from ischemia. Now it is a disease condition which is caused by reduced blood flow in a coronary artery due to atherosclerosis and occlusion of an artery by embolus or thrombus, and it is one of the major emergency medical condition. So it is all races, 10% before age of 40, 45% before 65, men more than women, and women protected because in their reproductive year because menopause after menopause only they form. Why? Because declining estrogen production is associated with exacerbation of coronary artery disease. And after age of 55, there is no difference between male and female in the presentation or the risk factors associated with ischemic heart disease. So what are the risk factors for ischemic heart disease? Yeah, can
Smoking.
answer. Smoking, yes.
Sedentary
Alcohol.
lifestyle.
Sedentary lifestyle.
Alcohol.
Alcohol.
Dyslipidemia.
Dyslipidemia.
Family.
Diabetes mellitus.
Oh, very good. Family history. Diabetes mellitus. Hypertension. Yeah, all these are going to be your risk factors. But they say, usually females, they say there is a protection. But after menopause, that is after 55 years of age, both have the equal chances and equal chances of developing MI. But before that, it is men more than women. So this is what all of you told, no, the same thing. So what are the diseases? As we already discussed, diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia in the form of increased LDL, decrease of HDL, increased triglycerides, and obesity. Then lifestyle is your smoking, lack of exercise, job stress, and now with all this modern saturated fat diet. Now that what they say is now initially they used to see that urban population had more of all this ischemic heart disease changes and rural was relatively protected, but now this is not so. Even when the rural population is slowly getting urbanized and taking the wrong dietary intake, now this is worsening, so that ischemic heart disease is equally seen, diabetes is equally seen, hypertension is equally present even in a non-urban area. Now this is a very, what you call, very worrisome factor which is going on, especially in India, where Asians are already prone for all the related vascular diseases. Then of course genetics play a role, that is family history of ischemic heart disease, others like your HOCM, anemia, all these others are going to be which is going to add on to your risk factors. So when we go to the pathogenesis of this coronary artery occlusion, it is this atheromatous plaque which gets disrupted. That is by hemorrhage or mechanical force exposing the subendothelial collagen and a necrotic plaque contents to the blood. Now what happens once it is exposed? Platelet adhere, aggregate, and are activated. So this is the place where we are going to give aspirin, clopidogrel, all these inhibitors, because all the part is acting. So release thromboxane A2, adenosine diphosphate, serotonin. So again, it is going to worsen. So initially it is going to be a platelet fibrin mass, and later on it becomes a full-blown thrombus. Now this activation of coagulation by exposure of tissue factor and other mechanisms add to the growing thrombus, and which evolve completely to occlude the coronary artery lumen. Any ischemia or any unstable angina, this process is going to go on. In myocardial infarction, it is going to be a complete blockade. Now this so when you roughly there is a left anterior descending, that is LAD, right coronary artery, and left circumflex artery. These are the main arterial zones of perfusion. And LAD, that is left anterior descending artery, forms the 40 to 50% of cases, and most of the mortality occur when that particular artery is involved. Right coronary artery, when it is involved, we get, of course, we get some changes and more of rhythm disturbance. Why is it so? Why should right coronary artery block cause rhythm disturbance?
SA node.
SA node, yeah, very good. So the supply is, right coronary artery supplies your SA node in 90% of cases. So when it happens, when this gets affected, the patient may land up with the bradyarrhythmia. Unless you do a pacemaking, you may lose the patient, not because of the blockade per se, because of the arrhythmias. In LAD, when there is a block, you are going to get arrhythmias in the form of ventricular fibrillation and ventricular tachycardia, electrical disturbance related disease. And of course, 15 to 20% left circumflex artery can be involved. Now, when we were talking of this angina, you can have some things called angina equivalents. What are these angina equivalents?
Other than the angina symptom,
What is it? What are the symptoms?
um,
Dyspnea,
Yes, so you can have dyspnea, faintness, no, you're feeling of giddiness, nausea,
erectations,
palpitation, very good, and fatigue.
palpitations.
Now, suppose if the patient comes, you can have even epigastric pain. Now, suppose a person comes with epigastric pain. What will you infer from that?
Gastritis.
Yeah, one is gastritis. Suppose if it is myocardial infarction, they say that inferior wall MI presents frequently as epigastric pain. And of course, silent, like diabetic or any person who comes with epigastric pain, of course, you are going to think of gastritis, but we should always rule out MI in that setting. Okay. And this equivalence, a patient comes with dyspnea, sudden onset dyspnea, you should always rule out the ischemic pathology. Otherwise, we may lose the patient. Okay. So what, as I already told you, the initial phases, there's only subendocardial infarction. The other 2/3 may be reperfused. So ECG, not much, but you should know that if it is a full-blown myocardial infarction, you call it as STEMI, that is ST elevation MI. This occurs when there is a transmural infarct. Okay, when there is a necrosis which enters through the entire wall. But sometimes what happens is it stops with that. That is, you don't get the complete block. So it may end up as subendocardial infarct. Only the endocardium is affected, but others get recovered. So this may happen when there is hypotension, severe atherosclerosis, shock superimposed on coronary stenosis, when 2 or 3 factors together. So it is not causing a complete block, but it may cause this sort of a presentation. So symptoms typical is chest pain. As we already spoke about angina, it can present as dyspnea, fatigue, increased sweating. Why do you get nausea, vomiting? Why is nausea, vomiting associated with myocardial infarction?
vagal stimulation.
Very good. So because of this vagal stimuli. Then lightheadedness, palpitation, anxiety, hyper or hypotension, whatever, insomnia, arrhythmias, and they'll have that, anxiety is typically there in the persons. So whenever a patient, this typical, no, so what are the complications? This next class, I'm going to go in detail. So the complications will be your papillary muscle dysfunction, right ventricular infarction may cause hypotension, myocardial rupture, congestive heart failure, cardiogenic shock, arrhythmias, then your pericarditis. What is Dressler's syndrome?
Post-MI pericarditis.
Yeah, post-MI pericarditis, which is due to what?
Autoimmune reaction.
Very good. It is an autoimmune reaction. So what is the importance? What drug will you give?
Corticosteroids.
Yes. So steroids. So that is one place where steroids will have to be given. Then they may present with rupture, chamber dilatation, mural thrombus, thromboembolism, ventricular aneurysm. No, all these are the various complications of myocardial infarction. So we'll just given an overview of myocardial infarction. Next class, that is next Tuesday, I think we'll be dealing in detail. Now we'll come to chronic ischemic heart disease. Now, when there is no minor ischemic changes which occurs in a major all the parts of your myocardium, at one stage what happens is the heart starts failing. When what I told you as systolic dysfunction. So this may occur without any previous history of myocardial infarction. So chronic ischemic heart disease, also known as ischemic cardiomyopathy, is essentially progressive heart failure secondary to ischemic myocardial damage. Now the difference here is you don't have that. Not all the patients you will get history of myocardial infarction. There may be they may have had some stable anginal pain, or it may have been silent also, especially in the background of diabetes and all. What is this New York Heart Association classification?
Grading of dyspnea.
Yes, so this grading of dyspnea is not only for dyspnea, even for angina, palpitation. This is the common grading which we use. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So this is a very important thing which we are going to use when there is an ischemic cardiomyopathy for any patient. That is, you will have no limitation, slight limitation, marked limitation, and even at rest. Okay, I think this is going to be important for you in clinics also. So now this will give us a clue that a patient who is in slight limitation or marked limitation, there's almost so much damage has been done. So that is the importance of your NIHA classification in your chronic ischemic heart disease. So they may be having typical exertional angina, which is relieved by the rest. But the problem is this angina, typical anginal chest pain, does not occur in diabetic and also in women. No, you don't get the typical presentation, and there may not be typically a provoking factor, so they may have been missed. So they land up finally with a cardiomyopathy. So we should always remember this angina equivalence. Okay, we should not miss out these points. So, so which are the patients we are going to be careful and getting the history is when there is a family history. Already a person is having a family history, you should be very careful. Then any, the females more than 55 or less than 55, if there is a past history, then all the risk factors are there. So you should always be on a lookout. Unless you look for it, you may miss it. So in most instances, there is history of previous MI, but there may be some things what I have already told you where you may not get such history. So in this setting, chronic ischemic heart disease appears when the compensatory mechanism, that is hypertrophy of the residual viable myocardium, begins to fail. Now the problem is once the patient is come to this stage, treatment, one, you cannot give them back the normal lifestyle, and second, it's always a downhill course after that. In other cases, severe obstructive coronary artery disease can cause diffuse myocardial dysfunction without frank infarction. As I told you, not all cases are going to present with myocardial infarction. So what will be the clinical feature? It will be a severe progressive heart failure characterized by chronic heart disease, ischemic heart disease. And of course, on and off, they may have these episodes of angina and all. Now, what is the morbidity and mortality in such patients is mainly because of arrhythmias. So they may not, they may be apparently normal. So most of the patients, we have now old age related valvular heart disease. What are the old age related valvular heart disease? Tell me some.
Aortic stenosis.
Excellent. Aortic stenosis. Now in aortic stenosis, we have a fixed cardiac output. On top of that, patient is having changes of ischemic heart disease. Now it is a very dangerous cocktail what we are going to have. So this patient, if they go for some form of exercise, the patient may die. Second is, suppose the patient with a fixed output with a cardiac ischemia and does some exertion, that is unusual exertion. So that may happen. Or the patient may go for sudden cardiac death because it's just arrhythmias. They may go for ventricular fibrillation and ventricular tachycardia, and they may go for sudden cardiac death. So these are main things which you should look for. So clinical features when you are seeing the patient. So what happens is normally the patient may be apparently normal, but suppose they exercise or patient comes with the transient failure features. So what are the auscultatory feature for failure?
S3.
Excellent.
S3.
So you can have a S3 or a S4 can be present. Then if there is a papillary dysfunction, what will be the auscultatory finding?
Systolic murmurs.
Yes, because of
Mitral or tricuspid.
yes, mitral regurgitation. Then if already patient has aortic stenosis, what murmur will you have?
Ejection systolic murmur.
Ejection systolic murmur. Now, on top of that, suppose if the patient is having pulmonary hypertension due to some other cause, aortic regurgitation, part of either ischemic heart disease or some other problem. So all and hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So these are going to already a very bad heart disease patient. It is going to worsen further. So your clinical examination becomes very important. So you should see for the cardiac apex, it may be down and out because of left ventricular enlargement, or it may be out because of left ventricular hypertrophy. Then you have to look for mitral regurgitation, the systolic murmur finding. Then for pulmonary edema, suppose patient comes very dyspneic. So what is the typical auscultatory finding for pulmonary edema?
Bilateral basal crackles.
Bilateral basal crackles, you call otherwise called death rattles also you can have. If it is a bilateral fine crepitations, what does it indicate? Left ventricular failure. Okay, you should never forget. Bilateral basal crepitations indicate left ventricular failure. Now, patient is obese. Patient is having elevated fasting blood sugar. That is impaired fasting sugar, and patient is having hypertension. Patient is having dyslipidemia. What do you call such a constellation of thing is called as
Metabolic syndrome.
metabolic syndrome. So we have to look for all that. So that is the things which you are going to look for in the clinical features. So this, so when we have seen all this together, so this arrhythmias, congestive heart failure, and your intercurrent MI. So the most associated morbidity and mortality. They may further worsen the disease. No, heart failure is going to be worsening. It's a vicious cycle. Or they may develop an intercurrent MI and may die, or arrhythmia may be the cause of death. So now we have gone through the history, clinical symptoms. So our diagnosis is not, you have to see the symptom, do an analysis, examine, and then do the laboratory investigation. For cardiac, the most important investigation is ECG, interpretation of ECG and relevant laboratory investigations we have to do. Now, for myocardial infarction, the most important investigation is cardiac biomarkers, apart from ECG. In ECG, when you're going to see an ST elevation, you're straightforward, you know that it is ST elevation MI. Now, there is a group of patients, as I already told you, when you are not able to say for sure whether it is an unstable angina or a STEMI. Now, as I already told you, if it is an ST elevation MI or a complete block, we have to give thrombolytics. So, this was the group of things where we have to do a blood vessel, we have to do the markers where you know that there is an injured myocardial cells. So what are the markers? Myoglobin, troponin T and I, creatinine kinase, CKMB is the thing what we are going to see, and lactate dehydrogenase. Now, a cardiac biomarker by itself is your short notes question for you. Troponin and CKMB are has high specificity and sensitivity. Total CK is not a reliable marker because it can be found from other forms also. CKMB is more specific and indicates heart damage. And troponin T and I normally is not found in the circulation. So presence of it indicates MI. And so this troponin and CKMB are equally sensitive markers for early stage of MI. But the problem is whenever we are going to test, which I'll tell you in the subsequent class, so it takes some 4 to 6 hours for, to get all the reports. Earliest we can get this by 2 hours. Now, with reperfusion, both troponin and CKMB may peak early, but it will be there almost 4 to 5 days. So just when we are seeing at only one point of time, the patient may have had earlier also. So it is only a combination of physical signs, symptoms, your ECG and your biomarkers, which will decide on what treatment to be given. So these are the other protein elevations which can occur, like AST, ALT, your LDH, CK, CKMB, all these are there, which you can just go through it. Okay, so now we have finally come to the treatment. So investigation, this is only for MI, but other investigation, what you should do is, what are the other investigations should be done?
Angiography.
Before that, risk factors, all the risk factors, no?
Lipid profile.
So very good. So lipid profile is very important. Sugar is very important. Renal function should be analyzed. So all that is important. Angio, of course, is the last of your diagnostic, which I'll come later. Okay. Now coming, so how are we going to, this is your flow chart. So a patient comes, clinical consultation, we do history and examination. Then the basic blood test, what we discussed, 12 lead ECG, chest X-ray and echocardiography. Chest X-ray, what will it show?
Ventricular hypertrophy.
Very good. So you'll have an enlarged heart, so that it will give a clue. If there is a calcification, it can be seen. Echo will give us a clue of what is the ejection fraction, if there is a diastolic dysfunction, systolic dysfunction. So we get a good clue with the echo. Now, suppose if all this is normal, in the sense that ECG is normal, X-ray is not contributory, echo seems to be normal, then we go for exercise ECG, that is treadmill test. In exercise ECG, there is a levels, no protocols are followed, and you make the person do an exercise in a fixed protocol. And if the patient starts developing ECG changes or the heart rate raises for this age group, for this sort of exercise, the heart rate should not raise beyond a certain level. So that is a clear-cut markings. If it raises beyond that, you know that in rest or in normal activity, patient is normal. But once the patient is given that form of exercise, the changes start appearing. So from that, if there is a clear diagnosis of angina, is there clear? Okay, you know it is an obstructive coronary artery disease. Now again, no. That is, even the treadmill is not contributory. So we think whether it's a non-anginal chest pain or normal ECG, still you have a doubt. Though everything is normal. Now suppose if it's a pilot. Now if it's a air pilot, no, see here, whenever he is going to take an aircraft here, the 300 or 400 persons' life is totally dependent on a pilot. So you cannot just like that leave him and say you are normal. So we'll again have to, such group of patient, even if everything is normal, but there is some risk factors are there or family history is there. Those are the patients where you are going to go for either, there are not a lot of MR, MR cardio or coronary angiography, angio, all that will be earlier in our testing panel. But if it is not such a important thing, you can still wait. We can ask them to, we can review them. Now you are sure that it is a non-anginal chest pain, so you label them as no coronary artery disease and we go for other causes. Or it is a non-obstructive coronary artery disease, that is, what do you call that, microvascular diseases which will not be shown up in ECG. So your lifestyle modification, risk factors, suppose diabetic, the aggressive control of diabetes, all that will come. Now this preventive therapies, I think you can just read up in the book. I'm not going to give much. So now obstructive coronary artery disease are there. Either you can go for medical or you can consider the surgical, that is coronary revascularization procedure. So what is the main non-pharmacological treatment you can give is, of course, do not smoke. Smoking, 100% we have to advise and keep on advising. Then aim for an ideal body weight and take regular exercises. Now, exercise does not mean that exercise should be such that beyond the point of chest discomfort is beneficial and may promote collateral vessels. So a person says, if I walk for maybe 1 kilometer or so, that's all I can do. You have to advise that's all. It should be whatever the patient can tolerate. Why are we doing that? Is it promotes the collateral formation, but it should be such that it should be only under our control. We should be guiding them how much to do or not to do. And 100% they should avoid unaccustomed exertions and vigorous exercise, especially after a heavy meal or in a very cold weather, because these are notorious factors. Then second thing is, when is the myocardial infarction common, morning or night? Morning, early morning. So there is always a diurnal variation and we should give respect to that and we should guide the patients accordingly. And suppose if they have to do that undue exertion, you can ask them to take sublingual nitrate before undertaking exertion. That may induce angina. So that is a last resort which you can guide them. Now, preventive therapy is the mainstay of therapy is, of course, antiplatelet, that is aspirin, clopidogrel, and statins. Now, the first anti-anginal drug therapy is nitrates. it immediately, because of its vasodilation effect, it immediately gives a relief. So nitrates act directly on vascular smooth muscle to produce venous and arteriolar dilatation. Initially, we saw a picture where the arterioles, that is where the main resistance is going to occur. So when you are going to dilate that, immediately the anginal pain gets relieved. They help angina by lowering the preload. Preload is, that is the return to the heart, and afterload, that is vasoconstriction. So both ways, preload and afterload is reduced. So which will reduce myocardial oxygen demand and by increasing myocardial oxygen supply through coronary vasodilatation. So nitrates is the first line. For any pain, immediately we give either ISDN, that is isosorbide dinitrate, NTG, nitroglycerin sublingual tablets, and suppose patient comes with myocardial infarction, even we give IV infusion. And so these are the drugs which will give nitrates. Next is beta blockers. So as we already spoke in a hypertension also, beta blocker is one drug which is in ischemic heart disease with systemic hypertension. We are always going to think in terms of beta blockers drugs. These lower myocardial oxygen demand by reducing heart rate, blood pressure, and myocardial contractility. But what is the side effect is that it may cause bronchospasm in patient with asthma. So you should be very careful using in an asthmatic patient. Otherwise, it's a very good drug to be given in a ischemic heart disease patient. You can also go for cardioselective preparations like metoprolol and bisoprolol. So these are the spectrum of beta blockers available, that is acebutolol, atenolol. Esmolol is an intravenous supply. Labetalol is your you can have tablet form. Then metoprolol. So all these are the spectrum of beta blockers which is available. Then next is your calcium channel blockers. So these drugs lower myocardial oxygen demand by reducing BP and myocardial contractility. Now, since dihydropyridine calcium antagonist like nifedipine and amlodipine may cause reflex tachycardia. So whenever you are going to use nifedipine, nifedipine nowadays is not at all used, at least in this setting. Only in renal failure you want to think. And there also you are having a better calcium channel blockers because it will cause reflex tachycardia, which may worsen your ischemic heart disease. So if there is no other go, you have to give amlodipine or something. You can always combine with a beta blocker. So that is about it. Then there is diltiazem. Diltiazem is a very good drug which can be given in the Prinzmetal angina. Verapamil you have to be very careful in giving because it may cause hypotension and especially in combination with beta blocker. So other anti-anginal drugs are nicotindil, that is potassium channel activators, vasodilator of both arterial and venous system. It's a very good drug. Then second, currently used is your this IF antagonist, that is ivabradine. Ivabradine is a very good drug which can be used in a patient with heart failure. Heart failure with ischemic heart disease, this is the drug of choice. Ivabradine has such a good effect. But the problem is it causes bradycardia by modulating ion channels in the sinus node. So you should be very careful. Only if the patient is having a heart rate above 70, you can think of ivabradine in a heart failure patient with ischemic heart disease. And another good drug down the line is ranolazine. Now we spoke about, first is your non-pharmacological. In pharmacological, I am talking only relevant to ischemic. Of course, you have to treat all the other risk factors. I have not come to that. Now statins. Now statins, what is the action of statin?
HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor.
So it is going to reduce your LDL cholesterol. But even in a patient with normal cholesterol, they say giving statin has a cardioprotective effect. So any patient who comes with ischemic heart disease, of course in dyslipidemia, you're going to give a high dose. But even if a patient is having in the borderline LDL range, you start statins. As they say, statins per se is going to have a protective effect on ischemic heart disease. Now, suppose if triglycerides is elevated, what is the drug you will give?
Niacin.
What doctor? Niacin, very good. Niacin, what else can be given?
Fibrates.
Yes, fibrates can be, fenofibrates that can be given. Now the interventions, what you can have is two. One, you can have a percutaneous coronary intervention, And second is what you can have is your CABG. Now, when do you do this percutaneous coronary intervention? That is placing of stents. So the main thing before going there is we go for angio. When you do an angiography, suppose if it is in a single vessel or two vessel which is approachable by your what do you call it? It can be approached by your catheter. That is when you go for stent procedures. Now, if it is triple vessel disease or extensive, microvascular disease, as in diabetes, when all the vessels are involved, or if the block is very distal, where you're not going to be able to reach by catheter, and such a time there is no other option, but you'll have to go for coronary artery bypass graft. Now, what is the indication when you're going to go for percutaneous coronary intervention is in a chronic stable patient who is becoming worsening, means you give an adequate medical therapy, but still the patient does not respond. That is a patient, that is the ideal candidate what you are going to take up for intervention. Or any person who's survived a cardiac arrest, that is sudden cardiac event, and we recover him. So such a patient is an indication for intervention. Then when there is a ventricular dysfunction, so when a ventricular dysfunction starts occurring, then you have no other option, but you will have to go for this intervention. And suppose there is a, when you do a treadmill test and there is a high risk of sustaining coronary events. That is initial, when you're doing the test yourself, this person can land up with mortality. So these are the candidates where you're going to do a percutaneous coronary intervention. So how do they do that? They take a guide wire and they advance it either from radial or femoral artery approach through with under radiographic control, and this guide wire is taken up to the stenotic coronary artery, and balloon is inflated to dilate the stenosis, and then the stent is placed. So this is how the basic procedure is done. So what is the main long-term complication of this procedure is they can go for restenosis. So nowadays what they do, they give is drug-eluting stents to, this atherosclerotic plaque can even deposit in the stents. So they give this drug-eluting stents, and of course it has a lifetime, and which will, secrete this sirolimus or paclitaxel. And this coronary bypass graft, they take internal mammary artery, radial artery of the patient's own saphenous vein, it used for bypass. But what are the complications is, usually 90% of patients are free of angina after 1 year. But after 5 or more years, 60% may again start developing angina. So as we have already pointed out, it's not a foolproof procedure. Okay, so I think I have covered the surgical, non-surgical, pharmacological, and of course, and the preventive therapy. So thank you all for your patience.
Ma'am,
Yes.
if one person in a family died
Okay.
because of a heart attack, would we consider that as significant family history? Huh?
Means
Around 60s.
Yeah.
If that person